Naihanchi. Hey!
Welcome to this section of the Naihanchi video. I mentioned before I gave myself a side project to do each year. I do my normal training, and in January I'll pick a subject and pursue that for a year. This year, I mentioned before, it's grappling and throwing, which is why a lot of the videos have been a little bit grappling, throwing heavy. But my last year's project was Naihanchi. And I've always had a fascination with this odd little kata that goes sideways and has so few moves. But very, very senior and hugely respected martial artists have sort of described it in unbelievable terms. The most ferocious karate fighter in history, allegedly, was Choki Motobu. And his famous statement is, karate begins with Naihanchi, karate ends with Naihanchi. He said he only knew Naihanchi, which isn't true. He knew other katas, but he said the only one that never let him down in a real fight was Naihanchi. The other ones had the uses, but Naihanchi every time. Asuka the first, who created Wado, he roughly said something along the lines of there's something deeply profound about Naihanchi, and it would take more than one lifetime to fully understand it. So if these two legendary karate masters are sort of saying, well, it begins and ends with it, and you would need more than one lifetime to understand it, least I can do is throw a year at it. So I did. And I took it from the perspective is I wanted to speak to and communicate with and study everything and all the different styles and their interpretations of what Naihanchi was about. And it seems that the original version of Naihanchi didn't use hip rotation. And speaking to a Shorin-ryu senior grade, he was saying that the whole idea of Naihanchi is to teach you about centres of gravity. So typically if you talk about the body, the centre of gravity of the body is the hara. So, instructor's always telling you to move from the hara, move from the middle. But everywhere else has its own centre of gravity. So the torso would be around this line. Your arm, the centre of gravity, would be your elbow. And this Shorin-ryu senior grade was telling me the whole point is to teach you about centres of gravity. So the punching techniques are creating power through centrifugal force by moving the centre of gravity. And this was why the old Okinawan schools, you would do Naihanchi non-stop and nothing else for 3 years minimum, sometimes 5 years. So when I first thought about this, well, how can you keep going for 5 years? And then you speak to these people, and the level of depth and complexity that's involved with it, I can now understand why Asuka the first says you could never learn it in a lifetime. It's like a never-ending rabbit hole, which when you think to get to the end of one water and it disappears off somewhere else. Even down to the looking left and right. The Shorin-ryu master that I was having a dialogue with, he said, well, if you look to the left, no matter how hard you try, your centre of gravity shifts. So the whole idea is you look to the left, you turn your shoulders to the right. So you maintain your centre of gravity. And as Sensei mentioned in his demonstration, the body's turned slightly, out you go. So people have gone to this level of depth and complexity that even the head turns are relevant, maintaining this perfect sense of centre of gravity. So I looked at it and it got ever more complicated. But fundamentally, it seems that Naihanchi was brought into the karate lexicon by our old friend Matsumura. We've discovered Matsumura previously. He learned Kushanku from the Chinese official, and he fought with the Chinese sailor called Chinto and encoded Chinto's fighting system into that kata. Matsumura was the one who brought Naihanchi into Okinawa. There is an old Chinese kung fu kata called Ni Fang Shi, which in the local Chinese dialect is pronounced Naihanchi, and that has this peculiar sideways aspect to it. So it seems that Matsumura went to China, learned Ni Fang Shi, and brought it back, and it's now what we know as Naihanchi. You hear different pronunciations of the name. Some call it Naihanchi, some call it Naifanchi, Naihanch, Naifanch. And the stuff that I've learned from my research is the Naifanchi pronunciations tend to be the Okinawan ones. So Naifanchi is a little bit closer to Nifangchi, the Chinese pronunciation. So when he went over to Japan, it became Naihanchi, maybe made a little bit more Japanese sounding rather than Okinawan Chinese. But there's a lineage all the way back. And again, speaking to various sort of experts in Naihanchi, the original method of punching was to isolate the hips. The hips didn't turn. It was only the upper body that turned. So you're using your centre of gravity and the centrifugal force by the turning of the centre of gravity to create the power in the punch. Having spent many years training and learning how to use my hips, this just sounded like bizarre. But I started playing around with this in training, getting people to hold pads for me and punching, and I could feel the power was starting to come along. So I thought maybe there's something in this. Well, by coincidence, a couple of weeks ago, there is a course run called the JMAC, Japanese Martial Arts Council. Been running for many, many years now. And Sensei Tomiyama, the Shitaru 9th Dan, he's been the regular feature all through the many years. An exceptional martial artist and a really nice guy. And somebody asked him the question, how do you generate power in your punches? And he says, when I got to 70, I decided to give up working hard. So I stopped rotating my hips, and he says, I use posture. And then he proceeded to punch one of his students just using his upper body. And his poor student looked like he'd been shot. He was absolutely destroyed. So I went back to the dojo and I asked one of my training partners to hold the pad, and I did it just using the upper body. And I didn't need to see his reaction because my hand hurt. Even punching a punching pad, it made my hand hurt. And he said the power was just off the chart. So, okay, how are we achieving this power? And Sensei has touched on this with the internals. And what Tomiyama Sensei was saying about posture was a very brief way of telling you how to engage various muscle chains. It's too complex to go in here, and we may end up doing another video on this. But there are muscle chains that connect your head to your feet, that connect your lower vertebrae to your thighs. And what he's talking about by posture is a quick and easy way of engaging these muscle chains. Once you get them engaged, then you can punch just using the upper body, and the output is tremendous. I'm not claiming to be an expert at it, I'm still working on this myself. But I can't dismiss it as being nonsense anymore, because I've seen Tomiyama Sensei do it, and I managed to achieve one of these punches on some pads. So that was the original idea of Naihanchi, is to teach you about centrifugal force, centres of gravity using the upper body. It seems that Itosu changed it to make it more as a feeder kata into Seisan or Seishan. We've mentioned Itosu before. He chopped Kushanku into parts to make the Pinan katas. And it looked like he was trying to do the same with Naihanchi. So it was Itosu who introduced the hip twist rather than just the upper body. He also changed the way the stance was set up. The original, from discussions with various senior Okinawan styles, is in Naihanchi, when they do it, is they tip backwards and go into the heels rather than being in the centre of the feet. And Choki Motobu mentions this in his book. He vehemently disagreed with Itosu about this turning the body and introducing the hips. And Motobu was a student of Itosu's. But Itosu was saying that we're in the stance, and like a lot of classic Okinawan kata techniques and stances, you pull the feet in. If you pull the feet in, you'll engage the adductors in the legs and you'll feel your hara engage. And the idea of this is the same in Seishan. You pull the feet in, squeeze as if you're trying to touch your ankles together, and all of a sudden your legs and your hara engage. So it seems Itosu was trying to do this as a feeder into Seishan. But Motobu disagreed. No, it's a separate entity. You should be on your heels, and he describes as you put tension into the small of your back. But if you take the stance and go into your heels, you feel the centre of the small of your back tense up. So to Motobu, who only ever used Naihanchi in fighting, this was the correct way to do it, and the upper body. So katas are living things, and they come and go and change, and you have to sort of look at it in the round. And this is my idea of a year's worth of study, was to find every aspect I could find and try and make some sense of what was going on. And there are further changes. The original upper body, Itosu's version with the hips. Kimura Sensei, the Shuka Kai master, he popularised the double hip. And this is a fantastic way of practising it, because the hip goes back and then forwards. So because you're isolated in this stance, it gives you a chance to practice your double hip technique. Shinzato Sensei, Shorin-ryu 8th Dan, he does a triple hip. It's just staggering to behold. He starts the punch, then whips the hip back. And he's been doing it many years, and he does it at blinding speed, and it's actually quite scary. You can feel the power coming off your video screen. So he's gone completely off piste. He's now triple rotation. So it seems that people have sort of taken Naihanchi and turned it into whatever. It's a canvas, and they paint onto it whatever they feel fit. But there are some sort of, I think from my study, if this was your first kata and you studied it for 3 years, the idea of rooting into this, it makes a lot of sense. I mentioned in the Pinan katas a video on body conditioning, nothing to do with karate, it was general physical training. And the first thing they said is get into a horse riding stance and stand there as long as you can. And you'll develop tremendous leg strength and lower section strength. So this is nothing to do with karate, nothing to do with martial arts, general fitness, standing, kibadachi as long as you can. So if you're spending 3 to 5 years doing this, you're going to develop some good leg strength. If you're teaching people to punch, you're not adding the complexity of having to get them into a zenkutsu and move through. They're standing on the spot. So if their elbows are kicking out or the wrist positions are bad, you can do this here. If you're teaching them to block, you can do this without having to worry about moving through stances. So I think if you're taking a beginner, trying to strengthen them up and trying to teach them basic techniques, Naihanchi would be a great way of doing it. And then you can get to the more complicated sections, centres of gravities, centrifugal force. So your 3 years suddenly doesn't sound a lot. Looking at Motobu's book, which I was reading recently again, when he's demonstrating the bunkai from Naihanchi, he's taking more of a tatasation stance, which as Sensei pointed out, if you're in Naihanchi and turn sideways, you've pretty much got tatasation. So he wasn't interpreting the kata purely as going sideways and doing everything in this stance. I think what he was trying to say is, we've learned how to set the frame, we've learned how to generate the energy, now I'm going to do the whole thing in a more practical stance. At least in tatasation, you cover the groin in here, your groin's open to attack. But without being stuck in Naihanchi stance for 3 years and learning all these intricacies, you're never going to be able to replicate it in more practical terms. So I think a lot of sort of Naihanchi is just standing on the spot and learning basic techniques, but to an incredible level. So I think that is like a fundamental principle of Naihanchi, and that's why it was such a fundamental kata and practice for such a long time, because it's incredibly deep and complex. So we're going to have a look, a brief look, because for such a simple kata, there's a never-ending succession of potential bunkai. The name Naihanchi apparently translates to internal divided conflict, and that's this idea that you are creating power through centre of gravities and centrifugal force. So that sort of plays out a little bit into our application. So what I want to sort of demonstrate as a practical technique is this section, the look in with the head, MP, this section from the beginning of the kata, and then this section. So hopefully you can see why Choki Motobu, the ferocious fighter, this was his #1 fighting kata. So I think statistically the #1 technique thrown in a street fight is a right hook. So the right hook comes in, boom, we deal with this, boom. So here's 2 sections of the kata. The look in with the head, we'll give him a West Bromwich welcome. MP. Smash his nose into your shoulder. And then to get rid of him, if we step back, it's from the beginning of the kata. So the simple techniques just taken from random from the kata, you can see very practical, very useful. Motobu loved it, and he used to go down the docks and fight drunken sailors for fun, just to try out his applications from Naihanchi, and he says it never loosened him down. Maybe you can see why. So I've drawn up a very brief family tree. People like Itosu and Motobu, they train with multiple senseis. So I've only included the people who are referenced regularly in these videos. And I've worked away down the family tree through the senseis who were very influential on Sensei Roger, Shimizu Sensei, Takamazawa Sensei. It's surprisingly a short journey back to Matsumura. Even Itosu, there are no photographs of Itosu, there are only drawings. So you see an image of him and you think it must have been forever ago. But it's very, very few generations. And we referenced Tomiyama Sensei and his punching technique. I put him in because he's come down a very similar line to the Wado tree, and he's even shorter, back to Matsumura. So hopefully at the end of the video we can pop the family tree up, you can have a look, and you suddenly work out why on a wet Wednesday afternoon you're standing in your pyjamas in Rowley Regis talking about people who only exist in cartoons.
So whenever we're practicing Kishanku or Naihanchi, I'm always asked, well, how high do I take my hand? How wide do I take it? How low do I take it? So it's a good point to think that Naihanchi, we do a lot of looking. So if you look forward, this is the height, width and depth that I recommend. Is if you look straight forward, you come up, and then you have something called the cone of vision. So when your hands start disappearing, that's your top. Then start going around the periphery of your cone of vision. Keep looking forward and bring them together. So you should see this cone, this circle. If you go like this and like this, you can't see your arms. So just to check it, keep looking, pick a point on the wall, come up until it starts disappearing, and that's the one extremity. Down to the other. Here, don't go doing this. Else that'll be a little bit stupid. So, and the other side. Keep looking. If you do that, and you end up doing a kata like this, then I advise you go to the opticians very quickly. So, thank you. Okay, so we've come to the end of the Naihanchi episode here. We will continue researching Naihanchi. Once you open one avenue, another avenue occurs. It's such a short kata. And some people, they don't do it at kata competitions because it's so short. Which is a shame really, because if you put this heart and spirit and the stances, the body structure into it, your posture, which is a big important part of Naihanchi. It's a shame that it's not included in competitions. So, but thank you for joining us, and maybe in the future we'll come back and do another one and see what else we found. So, enjoy. Thank you to Kerry Sensei and Simon for participating. Thank you again.